1999. Kind of dates me a little bit. And then more recently on storm surge issues, we work a lot with our Hurricane Center storm surge unit down there, Jamie Rome, and a lot of their products that they're putting out. And we've been doing a lot of sea level rise work, a lot of mapping work, which is what I'm going to kind of talk about today. So when you get it started, you go in, you're able to just type in your address. I'll do Charleston, there's Peninsula, and let's zoom out one more. You can see you got these little location spots here, so I can click on that. Pulls up. That's the U.S. Customs House with these photo locations, so we know the elevation there from the data, and then we can, with our slider bar here, we start out at mean high or high water, and we're using something called the VData model to do that. It's we model the tide over about 60 or 80 days, and we have a tide surface. So it does take into account the variability in the tidal surface instead of just interpolating between gauges. And then we can raise the sea level by 1 foot increments. And you can see on the photo, we know the elevation there, so we can kind of estimate when water is going to start to impact the structure. So I always like to point this out because when they built the Customs House back in the early 1900s, they knew what they were doing because that's probably the highest first floor elevation in downtown Charleston. If we'd only built the rest of the structures that way, we would be good. So it's got that aspect, and you can look at these kind of green areas. I like to show this too because these are the areas where we start to have the nuisance flooding, if you want to call it that. So these are our old shoreline kind of, you can outline them here, especially on the western side of the peninsula. So they're green because they're not connected, but as soon as you get to a certain threshold, they do connect. So these are the areas where it's coming up through, if you imagine passing a plane through the earth, then the water is going to start to show ponding in some areas there. So, and then we can go all the way up to 6 feet. We're in the process of probably mapping even higher than that, given the NOAA Tech report.
You can see the map for yourself by searching on the web for NOAA Digital Coast. It's a great tool.
Shay, you had a map to pull up here talking about billion-dollar disasters in 2017. This year had a lot of them.
Yeah, and I think that map is only through October 6th, right, Shay?
Let's see here. This is actually through September.
Okay, yeah, I saw.
Excuse me, but yeah,
I saw a similar one that goes up through October. But yeah, the key point is billion-dollar weather. You know how much, guys? You guys know how much the National Weather Service's annual budget is?
Probably less than $1 billion.
It's right around $1 billion. $1 billion is all we pay for the National Weather Service each year. It works out to a few dollars or less per citizen per year. Yet count all. Now these aren't just $1 billion events. These are just $1 billion plus events. I think the hurricane season alone is going to be a $200+ billion, just the hurricane season. So look at the value of the National Weather Service and the peanuts that we pay for a new satellite system or a new dual polar radar system versus the cost to society from these things. Now, of course, we can't throw money at it and stop these things. They're going to somewhat happen to some degree anyhow, but the more we can better predict. Let's just go there. Can I go there? Can I go there?
Let's do it.
Let's go there. The hurricane season. I mean, it's not like they were surprises, right? I mean, we were telling people for days that Hurricane Harvey was going to produce 40 to 50 inches of rainfall. Now, I know it was hard for people to fathom. It was hard for me to look at the models and see that it was talking about 50 inches of rain, but there was consensus. Hurricane Maria, Stevie Wonder could see that storm was going to hit Puerto Rico and cause damage. So when we have forecasts, we can monetize those and we can reduce lives lost and economic risk. So I'm trying to convey here to your listeners the importance of how this sort of improved forecastability tracks to save dollars. Because I'm sure you all saw that the National Hurricane Center issued a statement noting that their hurricane forecast this year are as good as they've ever been on average.
Let's talk about hurricanes for a second. That was a huge part. I know Shay had a huge vested interest in this hurricane season. And let's just go back to kind of the forecast. Do you think the forecast for this year were good, great, or kind of average?
No, I think they were good. I think Angela Fritz from Capital Weather Gang, Washington Post, nailed it on Weather Geeks. She made the point that the models were quite good with these storms in the out sort of time periods up through close to landfall. But these are global models. You take, I know the one that everyone comes to mind is Irma, and sort of Irma as it got closer to Florida. At one point there was some suggestion it was going to be an East Coast part of Florida storm. Then it kind of shifted more west. But Angela made the point, we're talking only about 30 to 50 miles here. Florida's a narrow narrow state that goes north-south. So these models just don't necessarily have the skill when you're getting down at that level. They're pretty good. You go back and look at the track forecast as this thing was barreling across the Atlantic and moving towards the coast. Man, it was right on. Then we got to start shifting to the H Wharf and some of the more fine scale models as we get close. But having said that, and I've said this a million times, even with Hurricane Irma, when it looked like it was going to be more of an East Coast Florida storm, you still had people evacuating from the eastern part of Florida, like Miami, Fort Lauderdale, over to Fort Myers. Fort Myers, guess what, was still in the cone. It was still, so you had people evacuated from one part of the cone to another part of the cone. And I think that illustrates, kind of getting back to what Scotty says, this notion that people have their own interpretations of what that cone is showing us. I personally would have not evacuated to another part of the cone.
And that also brings up a good point. We learned a lot from these storms this year, just how severe of a rain event that these hurricanes can bring to the coastline. We also saw negative storm surge in Tampa Bay. That was something that a lot of folks, I don't think they were aware that could happen in these storms. We've seen that here in South Carolina from some of these wraparound winds. Talk a little bit about storm surge flooding, negative storm surge flooding, and our experiences with those this year.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that, Shay. On that negative storm surge, those really dramatic images we were seeing in the Tampa Bay area. The first thing that came to mind to me is, you're right, I think a lot of people just were in awe of it and were fearful. We're just inspired by it. But there were a lot of careless acts that I saw. You had people going out. They don't realize that water's coming back at some point. It's coming back with a vengeance. So I think, if anything I would say about that, hopefully we can use that as an opportunity to kind of teach about the sort of secondary danger associated with that. The other thing I would say about storm surge that somewhat surprised me this year, I was a little surprised at the amount of storm surge in Jacksonville with Irma. I think that ended up being a significant story this year, the record-breaking storm surge there in Jacksonville and in the downtown into the Landing, if you're familiar with the Jacksonville area, and down by I guess Everbank or Evergreen Stadium, whatever it's called, Everbank Stadium, I think is what it's called. I thought that was a significant story, considering the fact that the storm itself was, sort of more to the west central part of the peninsula, but we still saw this significant surge. And of course, the inland effects. My kids were out of school for 3 days as the storm transitioned to a tropical storm and moved into Georgia and then veered off into Alabama. So I think it reminded us, that storm and the entire season reminded people to get over hurricane amnesia really quick, because we just hadn't had these kind of landfalling storms, or major landfalling storms, since '05.
It also showed the diversity in each storm, how each storm is different. There's no one that is exactly the same. And we saw, even here in Charleston, South Carolina, we had 10-foot high tide. And that's amazing, from a tropical storm force winds extending up to 500 miles away from the center of this thing, all the way up to the southeast. We had these major effects here, and tornadoes, and it just shows you how strong these storms are as a whole, from even long distances away. Yeah,
I would say, and I agree with that completely. They're all different threats, different personalities to these storms. With Harvey, for example, I think what's most memorable, not to take any away from the devastation that we saw from a landfalling Cat 4 storm near Corpus Christi and I guess Rockport or whatnot, but I think what's most memorable about Harvey is the rain. And guess what? It was a tropical storm at that point. So it really reinforces the fact that you don't have to have this big telegenic Category 4 storm with palm trees blowing all over the place and reporters ducking from parts of the roof as they're reporting out there. Just sustained days of tropical rainfall in Harvey was essentially the second part of the story. That was the other thing that I want to kind of quickly say. Harvey, I think it was difficult for people to grasp, because people, and I get, Shay, you're in the coast. I guarantee you most people there in Charleston are sensitized to a Cat 4 storm approaching them, because they're thinking about the storm surge and the wind and the tornadoes. Those are the things we think about. And I think that was what we saw with Texas. I think it was more difficult for people to grasp the fact that there was this sort of 1-2 punch, and the second punch was going to be this lingering flood storm, because I heard people say, well, gosh, we just didn't really think it was going to be this. I heard people in Houston saying, we didn't think it was just going to be like this. But we were saying it was going to be like that. But I just think people, when they haven't experienced something, they experience flooding all the time in Houston. So they probably like, I think they had the context of what they've experienced, but they haven't experienced anything like that. And so it's just hard for them to grasp.
For those folks who are getting ready for storm season, whether it be hurricanes, tornadoes, severe thunderstorms, flash flooding, what do you recommend for folks to have in their disaster kit or their survival kit? We'll give you I know this is your expertise, so hopefully folks who are watching this tonight afterwards can make that list and make sure they have everything covered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got full list and information on my website too at cherylnelson.net. But the basics, I think a lot of people know this, but I'll reiterate it and say you want at least a 2-week supply of non-perishable foods, like canned goods, granola bars, things like that. Also, at least a 2-week supply, if possible, of water as well, bottled water. NOAA weather radio is always key to have a generator if you can have that as well. But other things that you want to have in your kit, have that flash drive with all important documents on it. So we're talking insurance documents, medical records. I recommend a medical ID bracelet for elderly or people with medical issues that has all the information right there on your wrist on that flash drive. Have an inventory of everything in your house. Take photos. That way you can prove what you have. Other things you can do, first aid kit, blanket. You want to have items for your pets and your kids. Make sure you show that they have vaccinations, because a lot of shelters will not accept your pet if you don't have proof that they've been vaccinated. Have a picture of you and your pet together. Have them microchipped if possible. For the kids, have something to make them feel secure, like a game or a stuffed animal. I could go on and on with this list. Sturdy shoes is a good thing to have as well, because you don't want to be running around in flip-flops if there's debris everywhere. But those are just some of the things that you might want to have. I have a backpack full of stuff that I actually take into my safe room with me whenever there's a warning. And I have a kit in my car too, just in case I ever get stranded on the roadways.
The statewide coordination. I know one thing that has been a real, very helpful thing in the last couple, with the 2016 Matthew and 2017 Irma, is having John up there, at least from my perspective in South Carolina, having John up there next to the governor giving the weather briefing, so it's not being distilled. John, can you talk a little bit about how that came about? Because I feel like that hasn't always been the way it's been when we have these statewide events.
Yeah, sure. So about the time I started in the Columbia office, actually almost the entire management staff had retired within the past year. So there's really no management staff. So we had a whole new management staff come in, and we really made it a priority to make sure we were supporting our emergency managers during these events, going on site and making sure our forecasters were prepared to do the same. And there was a lot of work that went on in the background. We've the key is always building these relationships with our partners, working with them ahead of time, getting to know each other. That's really critical, building that trust. But we also had to coordinate between all the offices. And I have to say we have some great offices serving the Carolinas, and especially here in South Carolina. We have meetings with all the management staff. We're all on the same page. Our goal is not to compete against the other offices, it's to make sure we're getting the best information out there. So by building those relationships, we were invited in, just like North Carolina, says they have Nick Petro show up from the Raleigh office. South Carolina said, hey, you always have a seat at the table here if you want to come in. And we took them up on that. And I think most people find that once the Weather Service is there on site providing support, it's a service they really can't do without in the future, because that face-to-face communication during a hazardous weather event is ideal. Going through our remote briefings, you just don't get the same effect. But being there with the people making the decisions and aiding them is really critical. So once we got in there, I mean, I really appreciate what South Carolina Emergency Management has done, allowing us to come in there, and they saw the benefit, and we started briefing the governor, and they had asked us to go into the press conferences, and that's really a big thing, like you had mentioned,
well, we got
Jared,
some
because
in here today.
you know, sometimes a politician isn't a meteorologist, and you can't expect them to know the weather. It's just
all right. Well, thank you for coming. We do have an update.
That
as you know, this is there's a lot of work that go into making these plans and doing the logistics, and we must be flexible. We must be alert, and we are. Of course, the hurricane is gathering strength. As you know, it's expected to be a Category 4, which means over 130 miles an hour. So, John Quagliarello from the National Weather Service. You begin, please.
Thank you, Governor. So as of earlier this morning, the National Hurricane Center issued a hurricane watch and a storm surge watch from along the South Carolina coast from Edisto Beach northward. This hurricane watch means that hurricane force winds and life-threatening storm surge are all possible in that watch area. Florence is currently a Category 4 hurricane with wind speeds of 130 miles per hour. The official forecast track has changed little, still showing the potential for a major hurricane to make landfall somewhere along the Carolina coast Thursday night into early Friday. It's still very important, as we've been mentioning, to remember not to focus on the projected landfall location of Florence. While the official track shows landfall along the southern North Carolina coast, the cone of uncertainty still covers most of the South Carolina coastline, indicating a potential landfall along the South Carolina coast is still possible. There is some concern that residents in evacuation zones will see the track and think the storm will not pose a threat. But it's important to remember that the impacts of this hurricane will extend far beyond where it makes landfall. Hurricane force winds, storm surge inundation, again, are all possible in the watch area. In addition, as Florence nears the coast, it will slow its forward speed, like producing significant rainfall and flooding north and east of its track. So overall, it's better to get prepared now and get to a safe location if you're in an evacuation zone than risk being directly impacted by a landfalling major hurricane if Florence does indeed come to the South Carolina coast and make direct landfall here. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, John. And we'll answer questions in a minute. Effective immediately, I have lifted the mandatory evacuation order for all evacuation zones in the following 3 counties, only. They were to go into effect at noon. They will not go into effect. I have now lifted them in 3 counties and 3 counties only: Jasper, Beaufort, and Colleton. And that is based on the most recent information that Mr. Quagliarello just related. Edisto Beach, however, is in Colleton County. Edisto Beach is also within the hurricane watch zone, so Edisto Beach will still be considered at evacuation at 12 noon today under the evacuation order. The latest hurricane watch issued by the National Hurricane Center, as you know, extends along the coast from Edisto Beach all the way up to the North Carolina border and beyond. So that's what we're watching. What is a hurricane watch? As explained, that means that hurricane conditions, and those are sustained winds of 74 miles an hour or more, are possible within that area. A hurricane watch is typically issued 48 hours in advance of the anticipated onset of the hurricane in that area. How about our offices, state offices, and schools? State government offices and schools in Jasper, Beaufort, and Colleton counties, as I mentioned, as well as in Aiken, Allendale, Bamberg, and Barnwell counties, and Hampton County will reopen and operate tomorrow, Wednesday, September the 12th, according to the local authorities' direction. We're lifting that order as to them and them only. Also, I have ordered that the lane reversal, scheduled to begin at noon today on I-26 in Charleston, will start 1 hour earlier at 11 o'clock. It has already started to relieve traffic in that area. The Department of Transportation and Department of Public Safety were able to prepare and secure the lanes for reversal earlier than anticipated, and there's no reason for us not to go ahead and open them up. So they're open now, and traffic is flowing. Highway U.S. Highway 501 in Myrtle Beach is still on the 12 noon today scheduled order for its reversal. Because the planned evacuation has been lifted for Beaufort County, as mentioned earlier, there's no need to reverse those lanes there. That's on U.S. Highway 278 and Highway 21 in Beaufort County. There will be no reversal of those lanes there. Department of Transportation and Department of Public Safety will keep a presence, a strong presence on those highways, and will monitor the traffic there to ensure a steady and safe and normal traffic flow. So let me be clear. The mandatory evacuation is still in place for all the evacuation zones in Charleston County, Berkeley County, Dorchester, Georgetown, and Horry counties. This is still a very dangerous storm. We must take it very seriously. The weather man here and others are all predicting that this is a unpredictable storm, a hurricane, and so we must be vigilant. We are in a very deadly and important game of chess with Hurricane Florence, and what we are doing, Team South Carolina is staying one step ahead. And that's what we have done with the precision of these orders and instructions that we're giving now. Next, I'll call on General Livingston for his report.
Thank you, Governor.
General.
Team South Carolina, all of the departments continue to reposition resources. Director Smith and Secretary Hall will talk specifically about the lane reversal piece, but we are positioning all resources according to the governor's orders, and we're prepared to react to the hurricane in the other counties that are under the evacuation order. We're taking this extremely seriously. This is something we have not seen since Hugo. Even if the hurricane goes slightly north, we'll see effects like we saw in Charleston and Hugo. So this is a very serious storm, and Team South Carolina continues to reposition. We have about 1,800 National Guardsmen on duty right now, and we will continue to increase the mobilization as the storm gets closer. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, General. Secretary Hall.
Thank you, Governor. As you know, we are currently looking at our traffic volumes within the Myrtle Beach area as well as the Charleston area, and I'm here to report, as we've reported earlier today, that we are seeing significant traffic increases on the highways coming out of the Myrtle Beach area, in particular along Highway 501, SC9, Conway Bypass, and US 378. We're seeing anywhere from 4 to 6 times normal traffic volumes on those highways, and so the lane reversal on 501 will be just in time to help alleviate that. For the Charleston area, we're seeing approximately 3 times normal traffic volumes on I-26 heading in the westbound direction, and so that lane reversal as well will be just in time to help address some of those traffic flows. Governor.
Director Smith.
Thank you, Governor. Leroy Smith, Department of Public Safety. As the Governor stated, lane reversal operations on the I-26 corridor are underway. I must state that the flushing process went very smoothly this morning. With regard to US 501, the flushing process has started. That started at 11 a.m. this morning, and we anticipate having that lane reversal on the US 501 implemented at 12 noon. Now I just want to talk a little about that operation. The ingress will be at US 501 at the SC22 interchange, and the egress where it ends will be at the US 501 Marion bypass. It's about a 30-mile route, and again the flushing process has begun for that. Our evacuation plan is in full effect. That means that all of our resources dedicated to this endeavor are in position, whether it's a local evacuation routes, the traffic control points, etc. As the Governor alluded to earlier, we will be in a position to monitor and manage the traffic on the US 21 and US 278 highways. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Kim Stinson.
Thank you, Governor. The State Emergency Response Team, our priorities obviously are still evacuation and sheltering operation. You've heard about the evacuation piece, and so we'll talk a little bit about the sheltering piece. Shelters are starting to be opened right now. We've got about 28 shelters that will be opened here shortly, or if not already, and have a capacity of about 25,000 people. And then we can open additional shelters as needed, throughout the next couple of days. The full list of the shelters will be updated live in real time on our website at scemd.org, and it's also in our South Carolina Emergency Manager mobile app. Reminder that if you are going to a shelter, and a lot of people elect not to, they go with family and friends or find a hotel room somewhere, but if you go to a shelter, you will need blankets and pillows and comfort items, any medicines that you might have for any chronic conditions. Obviously, things like ID documents and that sort of thing. And then special food, if you have small children or on a restricted diet, there'll be food available, but it may not be, what you necessarily need all the time. And pets, service animals are allowed at the shelters, and there are some shelters that do accept pets, but there are many that don't. But workers will be there if you show up and help you make arrangements for your pet. And also, the last item I wanted to mention is our public information phone line, public information phone service is open right now, and it's at 1-866-246-0133. They have Spanish interpreters available if there's a need for that, but it's available right now and operational for evacuation questions, shelter questions, or any other questions that you might have. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you. Any questions?
Sorry, what was that number
Yes,
again?
ma'am. There it is.
So the lane reversals, how are those impacting folks trying to get gasoline and other supplies to the coast?
The Department of Transportation, in cooperation with DPS, we're developing some routing plans specifically for those tankers and special needs that need to get to the coast. So we're working them around the areas that they need to go.
Next question.
When are you expecting the peak hour of all these motors moving towards the Midlands, and then kind of what's your precaution to...
I mean, those million or so people.
Right. And what's your precaution to National Guardsmen and other people that's working along the highway?
I'm gonna defer to Secretary Hall in terms of the volume of traffic and so forth.
So we're seeing roughly currently about 3 times the normal volume that we expect to see on I-26. Obviously, with the storm approaching, with the evacuation order going into effect, we're expecting to see some additional increases in that. I don't have a specific time exactly when we expect to see those peak numbers, but we are monitoring those every hour and trying to make adjustments as needed with patrol to make sure we have things moving smoothly up and down the highways to get people out of the area of danger. So sometime, late today, early or tomorrow as well. Morning time seems to be a common time for people to want to get on the highways. So we're prepared. Whenever the peak comes, we'll be ready to handle it.
Thank you, General.
Governor. Just a reminder, we will terminate operations 6 hours before the onset of tropical force winds to give everybody, all the workers, a chance to remove the barriers and get into a safe location.
Governor, yesterday you mentioned that some of the school buses would be used to ferry people from those evacuation areas.
Right.
Has that started yet? If so, how can people find out this is going on? Where can they go?
They can call that number to get that information, and the others as well. But of course, we're not having, we're canceling that order in those counties that I mentioned earlier. A part of our approach to this, part of our team approach to this is to prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. And as the weather has shifted, we are making the precision adjustments to see that we're doing the right thing. But anybody want to comment more on that question?
Do you know the specifics?
On the local?
Yes, sir.
It's a local decision with the buses. Go ahead.
Yeah. All the local counties, the coastal counties, have plans to transport people without transportation assets themselves to centralized pickup points and then take them to shelters. So the first place to probably call is the county, and many of them have information lines or county emergency management. But if that doesn't work, you can't. Certainly this number right here will help as well.
Governor, following up on your preparation comment, there are those that are saying that you pulled the trigger too early, criticizing you, especially now that some of the order has been lifted. What would you say to that?
Well, the order that did not go into effect was lifted. As I say, this is a very dangerous hurricane, and we do not want to gamble with a single life of a single South Carolinian. We live on the coast, so we're going to have hurricanes, and we must take precautions. And everyone agrees this is one of the most dangerous and most unpredictable we've seen, with a force that is even greater than Hugo, which a lot of us remember as being very strong. So we try to operate on the very best and latest information with precision, just not to inconvenience people when it's not necessary to do so, but also to be sure that our people are out of harm's way and that we've exercised all the logistical implications and everything we need to do to have thousands of public servants that are working to keep the people safe. This is a part of plan, and you may notice it when we announced the original precautions we on the lane reversals in Beaufort County. We had those in suspense. That is, they were not ordered to go into effect at noon today as the others were, and that's precisely because the situation in those counties towards the southern part of the state are a little different from the others, and we have now implemented further and refined that plan as you see today.
I want to go back to my bus question. So as it stands right now, there are no buses that you guys know of taking people to these shelters?
I'm sure that's ongoing right now, and that's part of the process. So I just can't tell you for sure, who's moving or what, but that's all part of the process. And right now, the evacuation doesn't start for another 30 minutes, so they probably don't have a lot of business yet, but they probably will later today.
Also, someone just asked me, is there a reason that there's not a sign language interpreter out here right now?
One was not available.
Yeah, exactly. But we'll have one here available 24 hours a day from now on.
On the order itself, you've mentioned that it's mandatory.
Yes.
What does that word mean exactly?
That means you must. You must go.
But what happens if you don't?
Well, to begin with, you might be a victim of the hurricane. Is one thing that might happen if you don't, because this evacuation order is based on the very best information we have from professional sources all over the world. And in the talent in South Carolina and sophistication working on it is second to none anywhere. This is our best estimate of the right thing to do.
But no one will be put in handcuffs and let
Well,
away.
technically, there have been instances when people have simply refused to leave, where they're saying that, for example, that their house was not going to be flooded, and it turned out the water was up over the roof, and they were invited to get into a boat and to leave, even though they did not want to go. Technically, it is a mandatory order.
Are you requiring people to sign any paperwork if they refuse to leave and that type of thing? Or?
No, sir.
Governor, there seemed to be some concern about hotels yesterday. Do we have any idea on the latest figures? Do people need to keep going west past?
We do. Dwayne Parrish is here, Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Director. Dwayne.
Thank you, Governor. Yes, the best way for those that are in the evacuation zones to check for availability outside the evacuations is to look at online travel agents such as Expedia, Travelocity.com. If there's a particular area they'd like to go, they can certainly look at that. You can also use hotel brand websites, other short-term stay sites such as Airbnb to check for areas outside of the evacuation zones. That's the fastest way to check availability.
Can they up the price because of this happening?
There are price gouging laws in South Carolina. I'm not to say they can't, but it'd be against the law. And once the evacuation order, which is now in effect as of noon today, will take place, price gouging laws are in place now for that to prevent that from happening.
What if that does happen? What do they do?
We'll follow up afterwards. We'll track that. People can call and report that to this number that you see on the screen here. Call and report a hotel that may be, or gas station or others that may be gouging, and report that, and we'll follow up after the storm.
And eventually, of course, that would, as Dwayne Parrish says, eventually that would get to the Attorney General's office for questions of investigation and prosecution. But it's very difficult to do anything on the spot, so people should not expect anything on the spot. Just as people should not expect to get arrested and made to leave. We have millions of people that will be being evacuated, so we want everybody to use their best judgment, obey the law and obey the instructions.
There are concerns from people that are hourly wage workers working in tourist kind of jobs along the coast. What would you tell them in terms of perhaps losing a week's wages?
Well, we live on the coast, and that means we have hurricanes. If we lived in other places, we'd have other things happen that are part of nature. And I think most of us are just happy to live in South Carolina because we think it's the best place to be of all. Any more questions for anyone? Yes.
Could I make a comment? Sure. I wanted to go back to the timeliness of the evacuation. It takes 36 to 48 hours to evacuate the coast. A storm can make a change in 2 to 3 hours that is unpredictable. So, as the governor says, we have to err on the side of caution to make sure that all of our citizens are safe. And one life is not worth an economic advantage somewhere else. So inconvenience is part of a hurricane response, but so is caution. As far as the county and the buses and things are concerned, the state sets the conditions for the counties to be able to evacuate people from the coast. But they'll make those decisions as their individual situations progress. And they'll make the announcements like Charleston is at the North Charleston Arena, but they will open that as they have the need to evacuate people. So please go to the locals for that, and the locals will keep us informed up here.
I was a little confused on the lane reversal. So lane reversals on 26 happened at 11 and for 501 at noon?
Yes.
Okay.
And how long will they continue?
Until further notice.
Yes, until further notice. But worst case scenario, we must have our officers removed from the routes. We have to retrieve our equipment before the onset of tropical storm force winds.
You mentioned some schools would be opening. Do you have plans to close any more schools moving forward?
No, that order's in effect except for those that I mentioned earlier. Those are certain counties that would be open.
So at this time, no more schools should be closing down?
Right. Other than those we mentioned yesterday. Okay. All right.
Is there a possibility that we could see evacuations lifted later on in other areas?
Everything is possible, just like the General Livingston just said. This storm, they're telling us, is very unpredictable. One of the aspects of that is once it gets here, it might stay for a while. It might not leave, which means we're going to have some flooding. We know that for sure. We don't know how high the winds are. We don't know how the surge is. That is, it was predicted earlier it'd be 10 feet above ground level on many parts of the coast. All those things are still changing, probably on a minute-by-minute basis, but we know we're going to have flooding, and if we have changes that need to be acted on, we'll do it immediately, and we will announce those right here.
And then lastly, I saw that President Trump approved your emergency order. Can you talk a little bit about what assistance help maybe that's giving the state?
That emergency declaration from the president opens the door to federal help, assistance, funds in a variety of ways. And he called yesterday to say he was doing that, and we are very appreciative of the quick response of the administration. Would anyone want to add about the assistance?
Right now, the state of South Carolina has been approved for what they call direct federal assistance, and then that would allow us to, through FEMA, procure anything from generators to food to tarps and that sort of thing. But we are not yet approved for our own procurement and get that 75% reimbursement that we normally get. So right now it's somewhat limited, but we expect that as time goes on that we'll be eligible for more programs and as the process continues.
What should people in the Midlands and more inland be worried about and preparing for? I mean, stores even in Columbia already have water flying off the shelf. Are those preparations?
That's good. That shows that the people are responding to the situation. The situation, again, according to everybody, this is a very dangerous storm. It could even be Category 5 by the time it gets here. It just gets off our coast. People need to be careful. Better to be safe than sorry. And it's a good sign when we see preparations being made.
Anything to the upstate? They're going to be taking a lot of people up there when we are.
We are live once again here at the
cars and car
families, encourage anything of them?
Is there what?
Anything in the upstate, encourage anything of people in the upstate. They'll be taking in a lot of people this way.
Well, they need to be on alert.
We are live once again.
Just like everyone else, because this is it's a dangerous storm, and we don't know how far the winds and the rain will go. As I say, we know we're going to have flooding. Anything else on that?
No. Obviously, we're known for hospitality, so I'm sure Greenville, Spartanburg, and the upstate will open their arms and welcome people.
Y'all, thank you very much.
We are live once again here at the National Hurricane Center. This is Ken Graham. I'm out here in the operations area. Let's look at all the latest information on Hurricane Florence, starting off with, we're looking at the satellite view here. We always talk about the eye, and definitely an eye present here signifying a pretty healthy storm. But I mean, you start looking at the overall size of this system and start looking at how big that'll be over the southeastern United States. A very large system. And we're talking even some of the 12-foot seas stretching 300 miles away from the center. So that's the impact over the oceans, and then we're going to be expecting an impact with soon even over land areas. Some of the new information that we have is, really we're looking at several different places where we are looking at an area of disturbed weather that getting into the Gulf of Mexico that could provide some rainfall, additional rainfall and potential flooding on the Texas coast. We're looking at, of course, at Hurricane Florence, Tropical Storm Isaac, and also Hurricane Helene, and also another little disturbed area up in the Atlantic. So very busy here at the Hurricane Center looking at all of these different areas. I will give you a couple updates. This is brand new from the 11 o'clock update. So we do have a situation with Isaac that we did put up hurricane watches for some of the islands as we see Isaac start keeping on moving. It looks like west at 16 miles an hour. And again, you see these tropical storm force winds extending well outside from the center with time. So slowly but surely potentially becoming a hurricane, but then encountering some shear, not the best conditions for development with time. And the latest update on Florence as well, not much has changed in the forecast. We're still holding at about 130 miles an hour, but again, whether it goes up and down in the wind speed, again, I really always try to reiterate, at the same time we're going to have catastrophic impacts. Hurricane force winds stretching about 40 miles from the center, and look at this, 150 miles away from the center, you're seeing those tropical storm force winds. And as I said, 12-foot seas, the impact stretching out 300 miles from this system. So that's pretty significant. Same story as before. We are expecting that slowdown with time. The closer these dots are together, that means really the slower the system. Look at this. Somewhere along the coast of the Carolinas, 8 o'clock Friday at this location. And look at this. By 8 a.m. Sunday, 2 days, sitting over a typical area, the same area, and that's going to spell trouble when it comes for the rainfall. So storm surge, rainfall, winds, and think about it, still a depression over central North Carolina, which means the longer it stays, the more wind, the more rain. That means the more trees that could fall and the more power outage. So significant event here. Let's look at those impacts when it comes to the rainfall. This is a serious situation when it comes to the water, and it's not just coastal. Our forecast looking at, you can easily see 15 to 20 inches, but some areas could see values up to 30 inches of rainfall. And if you notice, it's not just the coast. You look at much of North Carolina, you look at much of Virginia, and even northward into Delaware, Maryland, you can still see some large rainfall totals. And I do want to say this, just because you live in an area that's just on the outside, there's still some uncertainty in the final forecast. So some of this we've seen in the past. I've been doing this for 24 years. I've seen this happen where you can see some of this rainfall bounce back and forth a little left and right. So just because you may be out of this, some of the higher values now, you can get a rain band, a simple rain band stretch across here, and you can see some high values really quickly. So the rainfall is absolutely dangerous at what we're going to see, and life-threatening. And you really need to protect yourselves from some of that high rainfall amounts, especially if you're inland and along the coast. You got to remember, you're not safe just because you're inland. Storm surge is another thing that we look at. We do have a storm surge watch, meaning greater than 3 foot of storm surge in areas from central South Carolina all the way to the North Carolina-Virginia border. So look, you could get 3 foot and higher, and really when you start diving into the actual details, some of the big impacted areas could see storm surges, especially in areas where the water gets trapped in these tributaries where it starts squeezing the water in. You can see these 10 to 12 foot storm surge values. So remember, it's not just along these barrier islands. It's not just on the immediate coast. The water funnels in here. We're looking at the Pamlico Sound, the Pamlico River, where the river would normally flow out. And normally we see some water flowing out as a normal situation. With a storm surge, you actually reverse that and push water into these sounds and rivers, and as a result you pile it up, and you can see some very large values. Even down here in the Neuse River, the water coming in and piling up around New Bern. So this is the situation that's extremely dangerous. It causes half the fatalities in these tropical systems, and we got to watch for all this storm surge and all that inland rain very carefully, and of course the wind moving inland with the saturated soil. It's a catastrophic event. It's very life-saving, so please listen to those local officials in this situation to keep yourselves safe. We talk about the local officials. We have local weather forecast offices and river forecast centers that constantly work with emergency managers in your local communities. We are going to come over here and talk to Lance. He's here from the Houston office. He's the warning coordination meteorologist, and we're lucky to have him. We call him the decision support coordinator, where he's talking to the local offices, and we really look at the offices. I mean, let's talk about their role, because as soon as we talk about some of this inland water, you're going to start seeing flash flood warnings. You're going to see some of those products. So tell us about the local office.
Sure, Ken. Yeah, I'm actually here deployed from the Houston office, and kind of helping coordinate the messaging that's happening at all the field offices. And as Ken said, we have several of them involved in this event all up and down the East Coast right now, trying to educate their partners on all those threats that Ken's been talking about. And the field offices are really dialing it down to the specific communities. And so what are the impacts going to be? You know, what are the local details that they need to do to make decisions, maybe to make those evacuation decisions, and where to stand up shelters. We don't want to put a shelter in a more dangerous place from one hazard to another hazard. So you kind of have to see how all the hazards work within your local area.
And we talk about deployments at the local office. What do we mean by that?
So yeah, we shift our resources around our people to help where we're going to have the hardest hit areas. So right now we have meteorologists and hydrologists kind of moving to the highest threat areas. So if an office can spare somebody, they'll send them out. And so we're tracking all of that, trying to make sure we're being as wise as we can about our resources.
So there you have it. One of the big goals of our decision support and really looking at a weather-ready nation is to convert all the science that you see around us into basically converting that science into impacts, which you take those impacts and you convert those to really important decisions to save lives, and that's what it's all about. So we appreciate everybody here. We're going to be here the whole time watching this system, and I can't stress enough. I've been 24 years in the Weather Service. Let me tell you, this one really scares me. It's one of the situations you're going to get heavy rain, catastrophic, life-threatening storm surge, rain, and also the winds. Now's the time to prepare. This has been Ken Graham here at the National Hurricane Center.